Have you ever seen a dead body before? It isn't a pleasant thought. However, when discussing monstrous creatures, a body can be comforting. It means the threat is no more, and in our modern day, it can mean things beyond what our basic instincts tell us. It is knowledge. This is why it is so very interesting when we have the body of something we are told doesn't exist. And in this case, it is more interesting still, as it was seemingly found buried under a pile of alien corpses. Although compared to other cryptid bodies of days past, one could say the most interesting aspect isn't where it was found, but where it ended up. The fact that it never went away. We still have the body. This story starts in the latter half of 2015. Someone by the name of Leandro Benedicto Rivera Sarmiento, also known as Mario Perana, discovered a cave or tunnel system in the Peruvian desert between Palpa and Nazca. In this cave or tunnel system, there are bodies and artifacts such as carved stones and metal adornments, as well as specimens they would name the tridactyls, due to their 3 digits on their hands and feet. The next year, the Institute Inquires began trying to find qualified doctors and scientists to study the specimens in the caves. They initially work with Peruvian doctors to examine small specimens. No fraud is detected in these initial tests. In the next year, 2017, an explorer and historian by the name of Thierry Jamin and his team analyzed the specimens. These analyses included X-rays, CT scans, and carbon dating. They revealed the specimens were up to 1,700 years old. In 2018, more studies would find unique characteristics, such as the presence of rare metals like osmium and cadmium chloride, and eggs in the tridactyl named Josephina's abdomen. On November 11th the same year, the results of multiple medical, forensic, and biological investigations were presented to the Peruvian Congress. Biophysicist Olivier Serre affirms the biological nature of the subjects. In 2019, the Universidad Nacional San Luis Gonzaga, or UNICA, takes custody of the specimens for research. The Ministry of Culture attempts to confiscate them, but fails to prove fraud, and thus the tridactyls remain with UNICA. Mexican genetic bioinformatician Salvador Angel Romero Martinez prepared a computer study of the genetic data. In 2020, as studies continued, Josephina's eggs are confirmed to be organic material. In the next 2 years, research reveals more details about the metallic implants and genetics of the specimens. Something called the Miles paper is published, which suggests the tridactyls may be non-terrestrial species. In 2023, the story became much more public, as 2 of the small specimens were presented at the Mexican Congress, generating international attention. The Peruvian Ministry of Culture also attempts to raid UNICA to confiscate the tridactyl bodies, but the raid is postponed. In 2024, a new specimen named Montserrat was discovered. Montserrat is a pregnant tridactyl. A male specimen, a child, and a teenage tridactyl are also found. Dr. Edgar Hernandez Haripacker publishes 2 peer-reviewed articles highlighting morpho-anatomical, biometric, and craniometric characterization of a tridactyl specimen shortly before dying in an accident. Radiologist Enrique Carlos Canida found no signs of tampering. The Genetics and Molecular Biology Unit of the Peruvian Ministry of Culture states they lack the equipment to analyze the tridactyl DNA samples. In November of the same year, the Peruvian Congress organizes a public hearing where forensic experts and biologists confirm that the specimens have not been tampered with. In 2025, the Ministry of Culture meets with researchers to discuss the findings. Collaboration is agreed upon to advance research and improve heritage management. Intricate anatomical details in the absence of tampering backs the authenticity of these findings. These creatures remain with UNICA and continue to be studied. Throughout this whole process, the scientific consensus has been unanimous regarding the fact that the mummies are counterfeit archaeological artifacts. I initially dismissed them as such as well. However, in the summer of 2025, they were brought to my attention once again, specifically the one named Maria, classified as M01. The medical scan alone may be familiar to many of you. It is the spitting image of a cave crawler. Now let's take a step back from this strange situation. There are a couple aspects to this, and we need to take it in chunks. The first will be what this specimen means for crawler biology and physiology. The second is the credibility of this specimen and the tridactyls as a whole. And the third is the connection between crawlers and these supposed extraterrestrials it was found with. So why do I think this is a crawler? And what did we learn about crawlers by studying this specimen? I will list the M01 characteristics and what is and isn't already present in our information on crawlers. Then, once I've covered that, I will discuss what this new information could mean. M01 has been determined to have no external ears, a hairless head, and no auricles or earlobes, only the openings of the ear canals. This matches perfectly with crawlers thus far. The skull and eyes. This specimen has an elongated cranium, about 30% larger than a typical human, with marked eyeball protrusions. We haven't really specifically mentioned bulging eyes, but it does connect to our subterranean and nocturnal lifestyle, as it would need a larger pupil and thus a larger eye. As for the larger head, that is purely new information to log, and does not contradict existing information. The nose is present, and near normal in size and appearance, but slightly compressed. It is not a flat hole-only face. A lot of assumptions come from this image, but as mentioned with the larger head, those assumptions are not set in stone, and getting more angles will change that perspective. So this fits, and is also important information to log. The mouth and jaws. The M01 species has strong maxillary and mandibular protrusion with lack of full lip closure, and the creature has bulky lips. That reads as a mouth that tends to hang open and look large. I've always seen the crawler as having thin, virtually non-existent lips, but if they are similar enough shade to the rest of the face, and only seen in the dark, the opposite could be the case. The large hanging mouth certainly fits. One tribe literally called them rubber band man because of the way its mouth is stretched like a rubber band. Speaking of its mouth, one of the papers noted a class 2 skeletal pattern which should also be noted. Teeth. The papers do not say razor sharp. They reported severe dental abrasions, missing teeth, and root remnants. Abraded, not bladed. This doesn't change what the teeth look like, just how they came to look like that. Hands and feet. Tridactyl hands and feet have 3 digits each, are anatomically coherent, and have 4 phalanges per digit, without counting the 2 metacarpals that make up its rather rectangular palm. This is obviously one of the biggest divergences from our knowledge. No one has counted the fingers before, but it still comes as a bit of a surprise. Although maybe it shouldn't have, as I will explain later. Proportions. The hands are roughly 20.18 centimeters long, and the feet are roughly 22.41 centimeters long. Both are longer than human average, but similar in width. This tracks, since when the fingers or hand is described, the focus is always on how long the fingers are. Locomotion cue. The heel bone lacks the big posterior bump humans use for a stable upright stance. This could infer a forward-inclined gait. That supports low bipedal movement and an easy shift to ground contact posture. This obviously fits. The name is literally crawler. I will log this heel morphology as well. Height. M01 is 1.68 meters or 5 feet 6 inches. This is within the range we have seen for crawlers. Also keep in mind this is a mummy and might have some shrinkage. Now let's start including what we can deduce from the information in these studies, like habitat ecology. Moist environments are required for this species, such as caves, aquifers, underground rivers, wetlands, or shaded forests. And soil contact may have been essential. Amphibians absorb moisture and even oxygen through their skin. This animal was preserved in diatomaceous earth, a material that rapidly dehydrates organic tissue, hinting that moisture-dependent skin may have been critical for its survival. The habitats had to be liminal though, places at the threshold of water and earth, abandoned aqueducts similar to those in Nazca, swamps, or tunnels. Witnesses often report sightings near creeks, rivers, and culverts, so this isn't a surprise. I also have a sighting of one in a lake that I will link in the description. Now you may have heard me mention amphibians and places that are damp or near water. Well, some other facts regarding skin will help us understand respiration. M01 has hairless, pale, permeable skin similar to salamanders. From this we can infer a degree of cutaneous respiration, which is oxygen absorbed through the skin, in addition to lungs. This would explain why crawlers are often described as clammy, wet, slick, or a ghost-like white. It would also mean they are vulnerable to drying out, which forces them to stay near damp places, move at night, or underground. Now let's discuss feeding behavior. Amphibians are opportunistic carnivores, with their diet consisting of insects, fish, and small mammals. Reports of crawlers mention predatory watching, silent stalking, but more often than not don't mention any direct attack. It is likely they feed primarily on smaller prey and scavenge. Furthermore, the dental abrasions in M01 suggest a very tough diet of roots, bones, shells, or even using its teeth and mouth as tools like a gripping instrument. With its mouth always slightly open, this could serve a continuous moisture and/or respiration role. Another interesting factor is locomotion. As mentioned before, the heel indicates a forward-inclined gait. This would mean functional but unstable bipedalism. It can lurch upright briefly, but reverts to a low stance. Overall, a quadrupedal spider-like crawl is their default, while bipedal loping is used to intimidate or cover distances. As mentioned, it has an extra phalanx per finger and toe, which gives it added reach and flexibility, and thus helps with gripping surfaces, climbing walls, and clambering like cave salamanders. This is consistent with its movement described in reports as gliding, skittering, or not quite natural. While we are talking about its strange morphology, it seems the studies detected an absence of the fifth lumbar vertebra, in addition to different foci of arthropathies. This is likely connected to its locomotion in a similar manner to the lack of posterior bump and extra phalanges, but could also be for a different purpose. Now this next part is speculative, so keep that in mind, and don't take it as fully confirmed or anything. Its reproduction and social structure. Amphibians lay eggs in moist environments. If crawlers are analogous, reproduction may involve aquatic or semi-aquatic nesting. Some salamanders exhibit neoteny, which is retaining juvenile traits in adulthood, like in axolotls who retain gills in adulthood unlike other salamanders. Crawlers may similarly retain ambiguous or genderless traits, which would explain the lack of external genitalia. The often described genderless, thin, fetal-like features could be a neotenic adaptation. Moving on from that speculative section, there are interesting sensory adaptations. As mentioned, its large eyes are good for nocturnal and subterranean vision. A lack of external ears means it would have to instead rely on bone conduction and vibration sensing, like amphibians detecting ground tremors. This would also mean it is possibly more sensitive to low-frequency sound. This could explain some witnesses reporting feeling them before seeing them. Its compressed nose means its smell is likely reduced and it relies on its other senses. As for behavioral ecology, it could employ an avoidance strategy. Amphibians freeze, blend in, or flee rather than fight in the vast majority of general cases. Crawlers are almost always reported as observing, watching silently, then vanishing. If it is reliant on moisture, then sunlight and desiccation would be lethal, which ties in with the nocturnal, crepuscular appearances and explains the haunting, fleeting encounters. A lot of this explains fringe, less researched parts of crawlers. The slick, wet skin. I haven't seen that information looked at in depth, but now it makes perfect sense. So unlike the common narrative surrounding the tridactyls, these may not be reptilian aliens, but cryptic amphibian-adjacent hominoids. Subterranean dwellers half adapted to land, half reliant on wet, underground systems. They crawl like salamanders, lurk at thresholds of water and stone, need the night to keep their skin from desiccating, and are not fully human, not fully beast, but amphibious echoes of another evolutionary path. Actually, it was confirmed in analysis that they are primates. Now this is another speculative section, but it is important in understanding how crawlers could have evolved, or at least similar case studies. In my first crawler video, I narrated a biologist's perspective. They mentioned a similar appearance to a spider monkey. Not only do they look similar, but the spider monkey has 4 elongated fingers. Spider monkeys have a flatter nose than most other primates. They have good eyesight for swinging through trees, mainly to judge distance but also identify fruits and identify threats. Some spider monkeys, mainly those among Ateles hybridus, have pale blue eyes, not far off from the white reflections seen in crawlers. Although this feature is definitely in a minority of spider monkeys. Spider monkeys have relatively deep-set eye sockets. Whether they stem from a similar ancestor, is the ancestor of crawlers, or are just a case study for evolution working in this direction, it adds historical context and credence to the crawler's evolution. This is why I said maybe we shouldn't be surprised by the 3 fingers. 4 years ago, I mentioned the spider monkey's resemblance. Maybe we shouldn't be surprised by marrows either if we already have a semi-aquatic primate. Now before we discuss more taxonomic connections, we should talk about credibility. For most cryptids, Having the body is the most undeniable best piece of evidence, especially one analyzed by all different professions of scientists and doctors. So why has the scientific consensus been unanimous in these being fake? Are they just that in denial because of their worldview that having the thing dead in front of them isn't enough either? Well, that wouldn't surprise me at this point. There are stated reasons I will now review. The first source I will touch on is Carl Fegan's article in Archaeology Review. His first line of this article is as follows, quote, "The following is a quick look at a strange but popular story making its rounds on the internet, mostly in Facebook. I have no doubt that the average person will look at this and see it for what it is. Hoax." Right off the bat, association. Connecting the place it is shared rather than the primary source is not very scientific, but it certainly does paint it as originating on Facebook. Why would your first line be about where it's shared rather than where it came from? Well, discussing a scientific journal won't make people as dismissive as talking about Facebook. And of course, right off the bat, calling it a hoax that the average person could identify. These are assumptions and bias rather than facts, especially when he calls it a story instead of a discovery or investigation or something else less biased. Of course, it is also meant to be a topic sentence, but those usually contain an introduction to the article rather than an absolute about its conclusion. I will try to avoid semantics, but I think highlighting not only the bias, but the use of arguments without any real substance over arguments that use scientific data is important to analyzing the truth behind this rhetoric and the stance as a whole. The first point the author makes is referencing unrelated cases to prove people are gullible. This doesn't really say anything about the tridactyl data, so I will skip over it and its flaws. He then goes on to mention Facebook again, and instead of discussing the published articles first, or the congressional hearings, he finds the one news source he doesn't like that covered the topic and references that. He then, in reference to that news outlet, references even more cases unrelated like Bigfoot and aliens. Of course, he doesn't give any reason for their lack of authenticity either. Like I said before, these connections are arbitrary and don't prove anything in regards to the actual primary source and evidence, so I will skip over them. Proving people are gullible, or that those same gullible people only believe in things that aren't real, is not disproving the tridactyls. If I say someone is gullible enough to believe in a spaghetti deity, and that person also believes in gravity, therefore I disproved gravity, that makes no damn sense. For his next point, I want to give a direct quote of the whole thing. Quote, "The mummies look odd, like it's coated in plaster." Really? It looks odd? Did you ask about the hydrocarbon-based oil, sodium chloride, carbonate minerals, or diatomaceous earth's effect on the skin? Did you ask about the effect prolonged exposure to high humidity and temperature had on the skin? Or did you just take one glance and say it looks odd? He once again mentions a source he doesn't like. This time, it is Jamie Mosin. He references some other hoax this guy supposedly did. He did link a breakdown of why this is the case, so props should be given for that. It didn't have any primary sources or data, and ignores the fact that they shot the messenger with Jamie rather than the one to create it, but half points should be given for effort. Once again, a relation to someone you don't like doesn't disprove evidence. If he is hoaxing again, as you allege, you should be able to find out why, right? His last point references a since-deleted article whose title translates roughly to, "This is the fake alien hand that Mosin scientists determined to be anatomically correct and functional." I will move on to the points of this article, the first of which being that animals don't have more than one metatarsal per bone. Damn, I guess I missed my chance to say lactating animals don't lay eggs when they discovered the platypus. I've said this before and I'll say it again. A new discovery isn't suddenly dissolved by outdated information. These things clearly have highly specialized fingers. If a spider monkey can have 4 fingers, or the eye can spend millions of years evolving specifically to flip you the bird, then I think a split metacarpal for a longer, more dexterous, more rectangular palm in a creature already throwing away 2 fingers isn't that much of a leap. And that's without even getting into the alien theories some of the tridactyls garner. Next, he cherry picks the evidence brought by Paul Ronceros. I don't know much about the situation with him, but I will just agree that his hand is clearly fake and doesn't even have confirmation that it came from the same cave. After that, he says the claim for it being non-human is so weak, he won't even look at the CT scans and DNA analysis. Look, if he claimed it was too contaminated to be definitive, I might have at least partially agreed with him. But saying someone is so wrong you won't even look at the evidence proving them right is just about the worst argument I've ever heard. He then says the hands match human hands, after alterations. If you have to state they had alterations, then they are not human. Including some measurements or comparisons might have supported your point, but right now it is really only superficial and subjective. He says he is using comparative anatomy rather than Photoshop, but what are you comparing? The article doesn't say. Give which hand you are comparing and some solid numbers, and then maybe you can begin to have a case. Ignoring scans and biological samples in favor of eyeballing it is not a very credible argument. Going back to the original article, they mention a 100% human DNA confirmation. This is indeed a result of a DNA analysis. However, I can't seem to find what they are analyzing. For example, there's a tridactyl named Wawita, which we know was artificially made to have 3 fingers. While the same methods that determined it was artificially 3-fingered did not confirm as much for the other tridactyls. The only study I can find referencing 100% human DNA is in 2017 when research was still getting started up. It analyzed a single hand and matching biological material that possibly came from its brain. I don't think the main find here is a random mutilated hand and the dry goopy stuff found beside it. This might even be that Paul Roncero's hand. The next article was written by Rodolfo Salas and published in Sophomania. It is titled Scientist Debunks the Nazca Alien Mummy Hoax. This is a direct quote for their first point. Quote, the entire skeleton of Mosen's mummy is absolutely identical to a human skeleton. If it can be proven that the anatomy of the hands and feet have been modified, there would be no basis, other than faith or business, to continue asserting that this mummy belongs to a non-human species, since the skeleton would correspond to that of any human being. There are many tridactyls and we don't know which one they are referring to. We will assume the M01 for our purposes, in which case, does the 30% cranial elongation, compressed nose, large deep eye sockets, limb length, strong maxillary and mandibular protrusion, lack of full lip closure, bulky lips, lack of big posterior bump, different foci of arthropathies, hairless, pale, permeable skin, missing lumbar vertebrae, genderless appearance, and bone-conducting openings of the ear canals seem human to you? Their next claim is that the cave doesn't even exist. Then when presented with images, they said they were low quality. Well, they had to store it somewhere, and they had to film an empty cave somewhere. Even if it is fake, this point wouldn't make sense. I guess there is no discovery with no cave or tunnel, but there is also no fake without it either. They then discuss how blurry images are of no use. That's case by case, but the images of the tridactyls themselves are not blurry. I'm not sure why they are so fixated on this cave. They then mention Paul Ronceros, which I have already stated that I will skip over him, but their main gripe is a lack of scientists taking things out instead of archaeologists. I understand being careful, but isn't it the main job of an archaeologist? And even if it isn't, do scientific discoveries not count if a classist, racist institution isn't in control? I don't want to assume, but I've encountered enough scientific gatekeeping to at least recognize this sort of bias. Etho-known scientific discoveries never count. Measurements and data are not accurate unless they are done by an official researcher, like Jonathan Pruitt. But I'll reel it in before I go too far off topic. I'll show an image on screen on how they think these modifications were done. I'll now add labels to point out all the problems with their version. The fingers all converge directly in the center rather than being spread out. There are 3 phalanges and 1 metacarpal compared to the 4 phalanges and 2 metacarpals on the specimen. The fingers aren't nearly as long. The fingers don't spread with the range of motion or angle. The hand is not as long and shaped differently. The fingerprints are human rather than what was found. And to top it all off, this example was done in Photoshop, which does not account for the intricacies of trying to do this on an actual person or mummy, such as visible creases and stitches that show modifications, a mismatch between the distal and proximal ends of the phalanges, and the structural integrity of such phalanges in a modified body, as well as the reaction of the skin to diatomaceous earth. So to summarize, they did a shoddy Photoshop and expected it to be proof of how easy it is, yet somehow proved the opposite, and that just about does it for this article. Another point I saw mentioned is that cranium enlargement was common for this culture and time period. While that is true, these specimens show no stretching, discoloration, flattened angles, or grooves from the bandages used during the supposed enlargement process. And in the case of Maria, it would take a lot of effort to insert enough evidence to deduce it is actually an amphibious primate without it being strikingly obvious. Overall, the tridactyls hold up, and there's a surprisingly low amount of actual talking points against them, given the assumed consensus of them being fake or dolls. But if they aren't fake or dolls, are they aliens? Are crawlers aliens? Well, there are a lot of differences between the different tridactyls. The only similarities are human shape, general location found, and of course the 3 digits. But if they are the same species, no, they are not definitively aliens or even human-level intelligences. I've read the Miles paper, which claims to prove these are aliens, but it just discusses convergent evolution and an extra bone. This isn't very convincing. There's a lot we still don't know about these, but making assumptions doesn't fix that. In fact, it makes it worse. So we learned a lot about crawlers and these strange creatures in this video. While I only focused on the M01 type today due to its relevance, at some point I should revisit the others and figure out what they are. For the meantime, I've updated the ASP008 document. I hope you enjoyed this video and this momentous occasion. Subscribe if you want to see more, and like the video if you want others to see it. Comment your thoughts, because this is one of, if not the most interesting case I've covered. Goodbye.